My name is Gabriela Martinez, and I'm 34 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in my penthouse apartment overlooking the Seattle skyline, watching the city lights twinkle like stars below me. 3 years ago, I was sitting at a completely different table, one where my father looked me straight in the eye and said, "You take up too much space at this table, Gabriela." My entire family laughed. Not one person defended me. But some tables, once you leave them, you can never go back to. Before I tell you how I went from being the family disappointment to building a multi-million-dollar empire 3,000 miles away, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, smash that like button and subscribe because trust me, you won't believe how this revenge story unfolds. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Martinez family had always operated like a well-oiled machine, or at least that's what everyone believed from the outside. My father Roberto, 60 years old with calloused hands and an iron will, had built Martinez Construction from nothing into a thriving business that employed 40 people in our Texas hometown. My mother Carmen, 58 and eternally devoted to keeping peace, spent her days managing the household and her evenings hosting elaborate Sunday dinners that the whole extended family attended religiously. My older brother Diego, 36, was the golden child who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. He had the charm, the swagger, and most importantly, he was male. My younger sister Sophia, 28, was the baby who got away with everything simply by batting her eyelashes and playing the innocent card whenever trouble arose. Then there was me, Gabriela, the middle child who somehow became the family accountant by default because I had a head for numbers and actually cared about keeping our family business legitimate and profitable. For 12 years, I managed every financial aspect of Martinez Construction, from payroll to tax filings to contract negotiations. I worked 60-hour weeks while Diego focused on the fun parts of the business like meeting with clients and making deals that sounded impressive, but rarely translated into actual profit. Everything changed the day I discovered Diego had withdrawn $200,000 from our company's operating fund to invest in cryptocurrency and penny stocks. The investments had failed spectacularly, and our business account was dangerously low. When I discovered the unauthorized withdrawals, my stomach dropped to my feet. This wasn't just a mistake, it was potentially illegal, and it could destroy everything our father had built over 30 years. I spent 3 sleepless nights organizing the evidence before approaching my father. Bank statements, transaction records, failed investment documentation. Everything laid out in neat folders that told the story of Diego's reckless gambling with company funds. I walked into my father's office on a Tuesday morning, my hands shaking as I placed the folders on his desk. "Papa, we need to talk about Diego and the company finances." Roberto barely glanced at the paperwork before his face hardened. "What are you trying to do, Gabriela? Your brother made some investments that didn't work out. That's business. That's how men learn." His dismissive tone cut through me like a knife, but I pressed forward, showing him the exact amounts, the dates, the unauthorized nature of the withdrawals. "Papa, he took money without board approval. This could get us audited. This could destroy the company." But my father's loyalty to Diego was absolute and blind. "Your brother is learning the business. You're just jealous because he takes initiative while you sit behind a desk counting pennies." The accusation stung because it was so fundamentally unfair. I had dedicated my entire adult life to protecting our family's financial interests while Diego played fast and loose with money that wasn't his to risk. When I tried to involve my mother, Carmen simply wrung her hands and said, "Your father knows best, Mija. Don't cause problems in the family." Her refusal to even consider that Diego might have done something wrong felt like another betrayal. Sophia's reaction was even worse. She actually laughed when I explained the situation. "Gabby always was the family killjoy," she said, rolling her eyes. "Can't you just let Diego handle business without micromanaging everything?" The situation reached its breaking point at our weekly Sunday dinner. The entire extended family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins. Everyone gathered around my mother's massive dining room table laden with her famous tamales and enchiladas. The conversation was flowing, everyone laughing and sharing stories, when my father suddenly stood up and tapped his beer bottle with a fork to get everyone's attention. "I want to say something about family loyalty," Roberto announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Some people in this family understand that we support each other through thick and thin. Others spend their time looking for problems and pointing fingers instead of solutions." His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt every person at that table turn to stare at me. "Gabriella, you take up too much space at this table. You bring negativity and suspicion where there should be trust and support." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then Diego started chuckling. Sophia joined in. Within moments, the entire table was laughing, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone finding amusement in my public humiliation. My mother looked down at her plate, saying nothing. Not one single person defended me or questioned whether my father's words were appropriate or fair. I sat there, feeling my face burn with shame and rage, as my entire family treated my legitimate concerns about our business finances as a joke. The laughter echoed in my ears as I realized that in this family, being right meant nothing if you were female, and being responsible meant nothing if you weren't the favorite son. That night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were cleared, I sat in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling and making the hardest decision of my life. I was 31 years old, still living in the family home because it made financial sense, and because leaving felt like abandoning my responsibilities to the business. But I finally understood that my family would never see me as anything more than an obstacle to Diego's advancement, regardless of how much damage he caused or how hard I worked to protect our interests. The next morning, I submitted my resignation letter to Martinez Construction and gave my parents 30 days' notice that I would be moving out. My father's reaction was swift and brutal. "Fine," he said, not looking up from his morning coffee. "If you want to abandon your family over money, that shows what kind of person you really are." When I tried to explain that this wasn't about money but about respect and being valued for my contributions, he cut me off. "Successful businesses take risks, Gabriella. If you can't handle that, maybe you're not cut out for this work anyway." Diego's response was even more manipulative. He cornered me in the office later that day, putting on his most charming smile as he said, "Come on, sis, you're being dramatic. Dad was just trying to teach you about family priorities. We all know you're smart with numbers, but business is about more than spreadsheets." When I refused to back down, his mask slipped. "You know what? Good riddance. We'll be better off without your constant negativity dragging us down." But it was Diego and Sophia's coordinated campaign to isolate me that truly revealed their characters. Over the following weeks, they worked together to convince our parents that I was having some kind of mental breakdown, that my decision to leave was proof of instability rather than a rational response to being consistently devalued and disrespected. Diego told our mother, "Gabby's always been jealous of my relationship with Dad. She can't handle not being the center of attention anymore." Sophia added fuel to the fire by spreading rumors throughout our extended family and social circle that I was going through something and not thinking clearly. The isolation campaign was devastatingly effective. Family friends who had known me my entire life suddenly became distant and awkward in conversations. Cousins stopped inviting me to social gatherings. Even our family priest, Father Miguel, approached me after Mass one Sunday to ask if I needed counseling to help me work through my issues with family loyalty. The message was clear. Everyone believed I was the problem, not the system that had allowed Diego to steal from the company while I got blamed for pointing it out. My father's professional retaliation was the final blow. When I began applying for accounting positions with other local businesses, I discovered that Roberto had been sabotaging my references. 3 different potential employers mentioned during interviews that they had concerns about my reliability and team player mentality after speaking with my previous supervisor. One hiring manager was kind enough to tell me directly, "Your father said you left the family business under difficult circumstances and that he wouldn't recommend you for positions requiring financial responsibility." The cruelest part was how my family framed my departure to themselves and others. Rather than acknowledging that I had legitimate grievances about Diego's financial mismanagement and the family's refusal to address it, they created a narrative where I was an ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her family during a challenging time. Diego even had the audacity to tell people that he was trying to fix the financial problems Gabby created before she left. My mother's reaction was perhaps the most painful because it was wrapped in the language of love and concern. "Mija, I'm worried about you," she said during one of our last conversations before I left Texas. "You're throwing away your family for what? Pride? Your father built this business for all of us, and you're turning your back on that legacy." When I tried to explain that I wasn't turning my back on the legacy, but protecting it from Diego's reckless decisions, she shook her head sadly. "Your brother is learning, Gabriella. Men need time to grow into leadership roles. Women should support that process, not fight it." 3 weeks after my resignation, I loaded everything I owned into my Honda Civic and drove away from the only life I had ever known. I had $15,000 in savings, a bachelor's degree in accounting, 12 years of business experience, and absolutely no idea how I was going to rebuild my life 3,000 miles away from everything familiar. Behind me, I left a family who had chosen to believe comfortable lies rather than face uncomfortable truths about their golden boy's financial irresponsibility. Seattle felt like stepping into a different world. The gray skies and persistent drizzle matched my mood perfectly as I searched for both an apartment and a job in a city where I knew absolutely nobody. The cost of living was shocking compared to Texas. My savings would last maybe 3 months if I was extremely careful, and that was assuming I found work immediately. I rented a tiny studio apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, a space so small that my bed doubled as my couch and my kitchen table was a TV tray that folded against the wall. My job search began with high hopes that were quickly crushed by the reality of Seattle's competitive financial services market. My first interview was at Peterson & Associates, a mid-sized financial consulting firm with an impressive client list and a reputation for innovation. I spent hours preparing, researching their recent acquisitions, and studying their corporate philosophy. I felt confident walking into their downtown offices wearing my best suit and carrying a portfolio that showcased 12 years of increasingly responsible financial management experience. Marcus Peterson, the 45-year-old CEO, conducted the interview alongside his deputy director, Sarah Chin, who was 28 and had the kind of polished confidence that comes from an Ivy League MBA and family connections. The interview started well. They were impressed by my experience managing a multi-million-dollar construction company's finances, my success in reducing operating costs by 15% over 3 years, and my expertise in tax planning and compliance issues. But then came the question I had been dreading. Why did you leave your family's business? I had practiced this answer dozens of times, trying to find a way to explain the situation without sounding bitter or unprofessional. I gave them the sanitized version about wanting to explore opportunities outside of family business dynamics and expand my skill set in a more diverse corporate environment. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. "It's unusual for someone to leave a family business where they held such a senior position," Sarah observed, "especially to relocate across the country without having another position lined up first. That suggests either a very adventurous spirit or some significant conflict that made staying impossible." Her tone was pleasant, but I could tell she was probing for information I wasn't willing to share. I thought the interview had gone well despite that awkward moment. They said they would be in touch within a week, and I left feeling cautiously optimistic. What I didn't know was that Sarah Chin had taken it upon herself to dig deeper into my background. 3 days after my interview, she called Martinez Construction and asked to speak with Roberto about my work performance and the circumstances of my departure. My father's response was devastating and completely predictable. According to a mutual contact I wouldn't discover for months, Roberto told Sarah that I was unreliable and created workplace drama, that I had left the company in a difficult situation during a challenging financial period, and that he couldn't recommend me for any position requiring financial responsibility. He painted me as an unstable employee who had abandoned my duties without adequate notice during a crisis. The rejection call came exactly 1 week after my interview. We've decided to go with a candidate whose background is a better fit for our company culture, Sarah told me over the phone. No elaboration, no specific feedback, just a polite dismissal that left me wondering what I had done wrong. I wouldn't learn the truth about that reference check until much later, when I finally understood the full scope of my family's campaign to destroy my professional reputation. Over the following month, I had similar experiences at 6 different companies. Interviews that seemed to go well followed by unexplained rejections. I began to suspect that something was wrong with my references, but I couldn't prove it and I couldn't figure out how to address the problem without sounding paranoid or defensive. My savings dwindled as I struggled to pay rent and buy groceries while searching for professional positions that seemed increasingly out of reach. Finally, out of desperation more than choice, I took a part-time job at Grind Coffee, a small independent coffee shop in the Fremont neighborhood. The pay was barely above minimum wage, and the work was a far cry from managing million-dollar budgets and complex financial reporting systems. But I needed income, and the shop's owner, Elena Rodriguez, was willing to give me a chance without extensive background checks or reference calls to my family. Elena was 52 years old, a former corporate marketing executive who had opened Grind Coffee 5 years earlier after getting laid off from a tech company during a downsizing. She had warm brown eyes, prematurely gray hair that she wore in a messy bun, and the kind of practical wisdom that comes from starting over later in life. More importantly, she had an intuitive understanding of what it meant to rebuild your professional identity after losing everything familiar and comfortable. "You're obviously overqualified for this job," Elena told me during my brief interview, which consisted mainly of her showing me how to operate the espresso machine and explaining the shop's customer service philosophy. "I'm guessing there's a story behind why someone with your resume is applying to work at a coffee shop, and I'm not going to pry. But I will say this. Everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves, regardless of what happened in their past." Those words meant more to me than Elena could have possibly known. For the first time in months, someone was offering me an opportunity based on potential rather than demanding explanations about my family situation or perfect references from my previous life. As I learned to steam milk and take orders from Seattle's caffeine-dependent population, I felt like I was slowly rebuilding my confidence, one customer interaction at a time. Working at Grind Coffee turned out to be exactly the fresh start I needed, though not in the way I had expected. Elena noticed within the first week that I was naturally gravitating toward the business side of operations, tracking inventory, analyzing sales patterns, and suggesting improvements to reduce waste and increase efficiency. When she mentioned that her bookkeeping was several months behind and causing her stress, I offered to help organize her financial records during slow afternoon shifts. What I found was a small business owner who understood customer service and coffee quality but was drowning in the administrative aspects of running a company. Her records were scattered across multiple systems, her tax documentation was incomplete, and she was paying unnecessary fees because she didn't understand some of her vendor contracts. More importantly, she was missing opportunities to improve profitability through better cost management and strategic pricing adjustments. Over the course of several weeks, I reorganized Elena's entire financial system. I consolidated her record keeping into a single software platform, identified tax deductions she had been missing, renegotiated terms with 2 major suppliers, and created a monthly reporting system that gave her clear visibility into her business performance. The results were immediate. Her operating costs dropped by 12% in the first month, and she finally had the information she needed to make informed decisions about menu pricing and staffing levels. "Gabriella, this is incredible," Elena said as we reviewed her first monthly financial report on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. "For the first time since I opened this place, I actually understand whether I'm making money or just staying busy." She paused, studying the neat charts and graphs I had created. "You know this is way above and beyond what I'm paying you for, right? This is consultant-level work." That conversation led to my first real opportunity in Seattle. Elena had been part of a small business networking group called Women in Business Seattle, and she mentioned my work to several other members who were struggling with similar financial management challenges. Within a month, I had my first freelance client, Dr. Amanda Foster, a 41-year-old pediatrician who wanted to open her own practice, but was overwhelmed by the business planning and financial projections required for her startup loan application. Amanda was everything I aspired to be. Confident, successful, and building something meaningful on her own terms. She had worked for a large medical group for 15 years, saving money and gaining experience, while dreaming of opening a practice that would focus on underserved communities in South Seattle. She had the medical expertise and community connections, but the business side of healthcare was foreign territory. Working with Amanda felt like coming home to my professional identity. I helped her develop a comprehensive business plan, create realistic financial projections, identify potential funding sources, and navigate the complex regulatory requirements for opening a medical practice. More importantly, I was able to save her nearly $50,000 in unnecessary startup costs by recommending more efficient equipment leasing options and helping her negotiate better terms with medical supply vendors. "You probably saved my dream," Amanda told me as we finalized her loan application. I was so overwhelmed by all the financial stuff that I was starting to think maybe I should just stay where I am. "But you made it all make sense." Her enthusiasm and gratitude reminded me why I had fallen in love with accounting and business management in the first place. It wasn't about numbers on spreadsheets. It was about helping people achieve their goals and build sustainable enterprises. Through Amanda, I met Jonathan Hayes, a 38-year-old attorney who had recently left a large law firm to start his own practice, focusing on small business legal services and employment law. Jonathan was brilliant with legal strategy, but completely hopeless with financial management and business operations. He was operating out of a shared workspace, handling his own scheduling and billing, and making basic mistakes that were costing him thousands of dollars in lost revenue. My work with Jonathan became a case study in how proper financial systems could transform a struggling solo practice into a thriving small business. I helped him implement client management software, develop efficient billing procedures, create fee structures that reflected the true value of his services, and establish financial controls that prevented revenue leakage. Within 6 months, his monthly income had doubled, not because he was working more hours, but because he was working more efficiently and getting properly compensated for his expertise. The networking effect was powerful and immediate. Amanda recommended me to 3 other physicians who were considering independent practice. Jonathan referred 2 of his small business clients who needed financial consulting. Elena introduced me to other restaurant and retail owners who needed help with cost management and operational efficiency. Suddenly, I had more freelance work than I could handle while still working part-time at the coffee shop. For the first time since leaving Texas, I felt like I was building something meaningful. These weren't just clients. They were people who valued my expertise, respected my opinions, and treated me as a trusted advisor rather than a family member who needed to stay in her lane. The contrast with my previous family dynamic was striking and liberating. But perhaps most importantly, I was building genuine friendships with people who saw me for who I really was rather than who my family expected me to be. Elena became a mentor and mother figure who offered practical wisdom about building a life on your own terms. Amanda and Jonathan became both clients and close friends who included me in their personal lives and professional networks. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not because of family obligation but because of mutual respect and shared values. During this entire period, my family maintained complete radio silence. No calls, no texts, no attempts to check if I was surviving or succeeding in my new life. The silence hurt, but it also confirmed that leaving had been the right decision. If they truly cared about my well-being, they would have found a way to reach out regardless of their anger about my departure. Their complete lack of concern proved that I had never really been valued as a person, just as a function within their system. 6 months into my Seattle adventure, just as I was starting to feel stable and successful, my carefully constructed new life was threatened by a long-distance attack I never saw coming. The first sign of trouble was a phone call from my cousin Maria, Roberto's niece, who had always been somewhat neutral in family politics. "Gabby, I thought you should know what's happening down here," Maria said, her voice tight with concern. "The business is in serious trouble. Like really serious trouble. Diego's been making more investments, and they've lost even more money. Papa Roberto is talking about bankruptcy, and everyone's freaking out. The details Maria shared were both shocking and completely predictable. In the 6 months since I'd left, Diego had continued his gambling with company funds, this time losing an additional $300,000 in cryptocurrency investments and day trading schemes. Martinez Construction was now facing potential bankruptcy. Several major clients had canceled contracts due to delayed payments to subcontractors, and the company was being investigated by both the IRS and state regulatory agencies for various compliance violations. But here's the thing, Gabby, Maria continued. Instead of taking responsibility, Diego and Sofia have been telling everyone that you caused all these problems before you left, and that your departure during a crisis made everything worse. Papa Roberto is saying that if you really cared about the family, you would come back and help fix the mess. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. After months of ignoring my existence and publicly humiliating me for raising concerns about Diego's financial mismanagement, they now expected me to return and rescue them from the predictable consequences of the behavior they had defended and enabled. 3 days after Maria's call, my phone rang with a Texas number I recognized, my father's cell phone. My hands shook as I answered, not sure what to expect after months of silence. "Gabriella, this is your father." Roberto's voice was formal and cold, as if he was conducting a business negotiation rather than speaking to his daughter. "I'm sure you've heard about the challenges we're facing with the company. As someone who worked here for many years and understands our systems, you have a responsibility to help us through this difficult time." The conversation that followed revealed everything I needed to know about how my family viewed me and my role in their lives. There was no apology for the months of silence, no acknowledgement that I had been right about Diego's financial recklessness, no recognition that they had driven me away with their dismissive and disrespectful treatment. Instead, there was only the assumption that I owed them my expertise and labor regardless of how they had treated me. "Papa, I'm building a new life here," I told him. "I'm not coming back to fix problems that I warned everyone about months ago. You made it clear that my opinions weren't valued and that I wasn't welcome in the family business." His response was swift and vicious. "After everything we gave you, everything we invested in your education and career, you're going to abandon your family when we need you most? That's not the daughter we raised, Gabriella. That's selfish and ungrateful." When I continued to refuse, Roberto handed the phone to Sofia, who launched into a manipulative performance that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so transparent. "Gabby, Mama cries every night because you're not here," she said, her voice breaking with manufactured emotion. "She keeps asking what she did wrong to make you hate us so much. Diego feels terrible about the investment mistakes, and he knows you could help him fix everything. We're family, Gabby. Family doesn't abandon each other." The emotional manipulation was expertly crafted to hit all my vulnerable spots: guilt about my mother's pain, responsibility for fixing problems I hadn't created, and obligation to prioritize family loyalty over personal well-being. For a moment, I almost wavered. The thought of my mother crying did genuinely hurt, even though I knew Sofia was probably exaggerating for effect. But then I remembered the laughter around that Sunday dinner table, the months of character assassination, the professional sabotage that had made my job search in Seattle so difficult. "I'm sorry Mama is upset," I told Sofia. "But I'm not responsible for problems Diego created after I left, and I'm not coming back to enable more of the same behavior." When emotional manipulation failed, Diego took the phone and revealed the true depth of his vindictiveness. "You know what, Gabriella? If you're not going to help family, then you're not family at all. And if you're not family, then we don't owe you any loyalty either. We know where you're living. We know who you're working with. You can't hide from your responsibilities forever." The threat was clear, even if the specific details weren't. Diego had somehow gathered information about my new life in Seattle, and he was prepared to use that information to force me back into the family fold. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking with a combination of rage and fear. I had escaped their direct control by moving 3,000 miles away, but apparently that wasn't far enough to escape their reach entirely. Over the following week, I began to understand the scope of Diego's retaliation campaign. Someone had been making inquiries about me in Seattle's business community, asking questions about my background and spreading subtle doubts about my professional reliability. The first sign was when Marcus Peterson from Peterson and Associates, the company that had rejected me months earlier, called Jonathan Hayes to express concerns about my work with his law firm. It was the strangest conversation. Jonathan told me over coffee at Elena's shop. This guy Peterson said he had worked with you before and was worried about some ethical issues in your background. He wouldn't be specific, but he strongly suggested that I should be careful about giving you access to confidential financial information. The campaign was sophisticated and insidious. Rather than making direct accusations that could be challenged or proven false, Diego had apparently hired someone to plant vague concerns about my character and reliability throughout Seattle's tight-knit business community. The Whisper campaign was designed to damage my reputation without giving me any specific claims to refute or defend against. Within 2 weeks, I noticed the effects. 3 potential clients canceled consultation appointments at the last minute without explanation. A small restaurant owner who had been considering hiring me for monthly bookkeeping services suddenly stopped returning my calls. Even Elena mentioned that several of her business networking contacts had asked her pointed questions about my background and qualifications. The most devastating blow came when Amanda Foster called me into her office for what I assumed was a routine project meeting. Instead, she looked uncomfortable and upset as she explained that several of her medical colleagues had approached her with concerns about my background. "Gabby, I know you, and I trust you completely," Amanda said, her voice strained with emotion. "But I'm getting pressure from people who are important to my practice and my loan approval. They're saying there are questions about your integrity and your history with previous employers. I hate this, but I need to suspend our working relationship until I can figure out how to handle the situation." That night, I sat in my tiny studio apartment and faced the possibility that my family's long-distance campaign might succeed in destroying everything I had built in Seattle. I was losing clients, my professional reputation was being systematically undermined, and I had no way to fight back against attacks I couldn't even clearly identify or prove. For the first time since leaving Texas, I seriously considered giving up and going home. Maybe it would be easier to return, help fix the family business, and accept my role as the responsible daughter who cleaned up everyone else's mistakes. Maybe fighting for my independence wasn't worth the constant battle and isolation. But as I looked around my small apartment, my space, chosen and paid for by my own work, I realized that going back would mean accepting that my family's version of love was conditional on my compliance and submission. It would mean agreeing that my value as a person was determined by my usefulness to other people's goals and priorities. That realization crystallized something important. I wasn't just fighting for my career or my financial independence. I was fighting for the right to exist as a whole person with my own dreams, opinions, and boundaries. And that was a fight worth having, no matter how difficult or lonely it became. The Whisper campaign against my reputation accelerated rapidly over the following month, and I watched helplessly as my carefully built professional network began to crumble. The attacks were sophisticated precisely because they were subtle. No one made specific accusations that I could refute, but the constant stream of vague concerns about my reliability and ethical standards created a cloud of suspicion that was impossible to dispel through normal means. Marcus Peterson emerged as the primary vehicle for spreading these doubts throughout Seattle's business community. As CEO of a respected financial consulting firm, his opinions carried significant weight with other business owners and professionals. He seemed to take particular pleasure in expressing concerns about my background whenever my name came up in professional circles. The impact was devastating and swift. Within 3 weeks, I lost 60% of my freelance clients. Jonathan Hayes called me with obvious reluctance to explain that his law firm's partners had voted to terminate our consulting relationship after receiving multiple warnings about potential liability issues related to my access to confidential client information. Elena was forced to reduce my hours at the coffee shop because several regular customers had complained about my presence, citing unnamed concerns about my character. "This is killing me, Gabby," Elena said as we discussed the situation during a slow afternoon shift. I know these attacks are garbage, but I'm a small business owner. I can't afford to lose customers over someone else's vendetta against you. I hate that I'm being put in this position." The professional isolation was accompanied by a more insidious form of psychological warfare. I began receiving occasional phone calls at odd hours where the caller would hang up immediately when I answered. My apartment building's security system showed several instances of someone buzzing my unit and leaving when I didn't respond. Nothing overtly threatening, but enough to create a constant sense of unease and vulnerability. The breaking point came when I discovered that someone had been systematically contacting my remaining clients with increasingly specific and damaging allegations. Dr. Amanda Foster called me on a Friday afternoon, her voice tight with stress and apologetic eyes. "Gabby, I received a very detailed email this morning that I need to discuss with you," she said. "Someone claiming to have worked with you in Texas sent documentation suggesting that you were terminated from your previous position for financial irregularities and that you're currently under investigation for embezzlement. I know this is probably garbage, but the level of detail is concerning, and I'm being pressured by my business partners to address it formally." The accusation was a masterpiece of calculated destruction because it was based on just enough twisted truth to sound plausible while being completely false in its essential claims. Yes, I had left Martinez Construction under conflict-filled circumstances. Yes, there had been financial irregularities in the company, but those irregularities were Diego's unauthorized withdrawals, not anything I had done wrong. The truth had been inverted to make me the perpetrator instead of the whistleblower. That weekend, I finally decided to confront the source of my problems directly. I called Marcus Peterson's office and demanded a meeting to address what I now knew was a coordinated campaign to destroy my professional reputation. Marcus agreed to see me Monday morning, and the conversation that followed confirmed my worst fears about the scope and sophistication of the attacks against me. He was coldly professional as he explained that he had been contacted by my family members who were concerned about my mental stability and my tendency to create workplace conflicts. "Your father and brother provided quite a bit of documentation about your departure from the family business," Marcus said, spreading several pages across his desk. "According to them, you left during a financial crisis that you had helped create through poor decision-making and aggressive confrontations with other family members. They suggested that you might be experiencing some kind of breakdown that could make you unpredictable in professional settings." The documentation was a poisonous blend of half-truths and outright lies, presented in official-looking formats that would be convincing to someone who didn't know the real story. Diego had apparently spent considerable time and money creating a false narrative that portrayed me as an unstable employee who had abandoned her responsibilities during a crisis while trying to blame others for problems she had created. "My family is lying," I told Marcus flatly. "They're trying to force me to return home by destroying my ability to work independently. Everything they've told you is either completely false or deliberately twisted to hide the fact that my brother embezzled money from the company and I was blamed for reporting it." Marcus shrugged with the indifference of someone who had already made up his mind. "That may be true, but I have to base my recommendations on the information I receive. Your family seemed very credible, and they provided documentation to support their concerns. I have a responsibility to protect my professional community from potential risks." As I left Marcus's office, I understood that I was facing a level of systematic destruction that went far beyond family drama or professional disagreement. This was warfare, conducted through legal and professional channels, but designed to achieve the same result as physical violence: the complete destruction of my ability to support myself and live independently. That night, sitting alone in my apartment with a half-eaten sandwich and a growing pile of rejection emails, I came closer to giving up than at any point since leaving Texas. The attacks were working exactly as designed. My income was disappearing, my professional reputation was in ruins, and I was beginning to doubt my own perceptions of reality. The emotional toll was becoming unbearable. I wasn't sleeping well. I had lost weight from stress and reduced income, and I was starting to question whether I had been naive to think I could build a new life without my family's support and approval. Maybe Diego and Sophia were right. Maybe I was being stubborn and prideful instead of practical. Maybe going home and accepting my role as the family problem solver would be easier than continuing to fight an unwinnable battle. I spent that entire night awake, staring at my phone and drafting text messages to my father that I never sent. Messages offering to come home, to help fix the business problems, to accept whatever conditions they wanted to impose in exchange for ending their campaign of destruction. The loneliness and exhaustion made surrender seem like the only rational choice. But when morning came and I looked around my small apartment, my space, chosen and maintained through my own efforts, I realized that giving up would mean accepting that my family's love was purely conditional on my submission to their control. It would mean agreeing that I had no right to exist independently, no right to my own opinions about their behavior, no right to build a life that prioritized my own well-being alongside family loyalty. More importantly, I realized that if I returned home now, I would be trapped forever. They would know that they could destroy any attempt I made to live independently, and they would use that knowledge to control my choices for the rest of my life. This wasn't just about winning or losing a family conflict. It was about whether I would be allowed to exist as a full human being with my own agency and autonomy. That morning, as I sat with my coffee and watched the Seattle sunrise through my apartment window, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to surrender, and I wasn't going to keep playing defense against their attacks. It was time to go on offense and fight back with weapons they had taught me to use. The decision to stop playing defense and start fighting back marked a fundamental shift in how I approached my family's campaign of destruction. For months, I had been trying to defend myself against their attacks by maintaining the moral high ground and hoping that truth would eventually prevail. But I finally understood that they weren't interested in truth or fairness. They were interested in control, and they would use any means necessary to maintain it. My first call was to Amanda Foster, who had remained supportive despite the pressure she was receiving from her business partners. "Amanda, I need to ask you something that might sound crazy," I told her during a coffee meeting at Elena's shop. "Would you be willing to help me prove that the attacks against me are part of a coordinated campaign by my family to force me to return to Texas?" Amanda didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. These attacks are obviously personal rather than professional, and they're designed to destroy your career rather than address any legitimate concerns. What do you need me to do?" With Amanda's help, I began documenting the pattern of attacks and gathering evidence of their coordinated nature. We created a timeline that showed how the concerns about my background had emerged simultaneously across multiple professional networks, always with similar language and accusations. We identified connections between Marcus Peterson and other business leaders who had suddenly developed doubts about my reliability. Jonathan Hayes proved to be an invaluable ally in this process, despite his law firm's decision to terminate our professional relationship. "This is clearly tortious interference with business relationships," he explained as we reviewed the evidence. "Your family is deliberately sabotaging your professional opportunities through false statements and misrepresentations. That's illegal, and we can prove it if we gather enough documentation." But gathering evidence was only the first step in my counterattack. The more important work was taking proactive measures to protect my remaining clients and rebuild my professional reputation through aggressive transparency rather than defensive explanations. I decided to do something that felt terrifying but necessary. I called a meeting with my remaining clients and allies to explain exactly what was happening and provide them with complete documentation of the attacks against me. Rather than hoping they wouldn't hear the rumors or trying to address concerns reactively, I laid out the entire situation proactively and gave them everything they needed to make informed decisions about working with me. "Here's what's happening," I told the group, which included Elena, Amanda, Jonathan, and 3 other small business owners who had continued working with me despite the pressure. "My family is conducting a systematic campaign to destroy my professional reputation because I refuse to return home and help them cover up financial mismanagement. I have documentation of their coordination with local business leaders, and I want you to understand exactly what you're dealing with if you continue to associate with me professionally." The response was overwhelmingly supportive and energizing. Rather than being scared off by the complexity of the situation, these business owners were angry about the attacks and eager to help me fight back. Elena immediately offered to host a networking event specifically designed to introduce me to new potential clients who hadn't been exposed to the Whisper campaign. Amanda volunteered to write detailed testimonials about my work quality and professional integrity. Jonathan offered to provide legal services on a reduced fee basis to help me build a case against my family's interference. But the most important aspect of my counterattack was investigating the financial situation at Martinez Construction to determine whether there were legal vulnerabilities I could exploit in my family's business operations. I hired a private investigator in Texas, a former IRS agent who specialized in financial fraud cases, to conduct a comprehensive review of the company's recent financial activities and tax filings. What the investigator discovered exceeded even my worst expectations about Diego's financial mismanagement and my father's complicity in covering it up. Over the 18 months since I had left Texas, Diego had withdrawn a total of $800,000 from company accounts for personal investments and expenditures. To hide these withdrawals from auditors and creditors, Roberto had been falsifying financial reports and tax filings, creating fictional revenue entries and expense allocations that made the company appear more profitable than it actually was. The documentation was comprehensive and damning. Bank records showed systematic transfers from business accounts to Diego's personal investment accounts. Tax filings contained clear discrepancies with actual business activities and revenue sources. Email correspondence between Roberto and the company's accountant included explicit discussions about adjusting numbers to hide Diego's withdrawals from potential investors and creditors. Armed with this evidence, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable months earlier when I was still hoping for reconciliation with my family. I compiled a comprehensive package documenting all of Diego's unauthorized withdrawals and Roberto's tax fraud, and I sent copies to the IRS, the Texas State Board of Accountancy, the Better Business Bureau, and several major contractors who were considering large projects with Martinez Construction. I also took the strategic step of contacting potential clients of Martinez Construction directly to warn them about the company's financial instability and the ongoing federal investigation. Within a week, 3 major contracts were canceled. 2 suppliers demanded immediate payment for outstanding invoices, and the company's bonding agent began proceedings to revoke their license for large construction projects. The impact on my family's business was swift and devastating. Diego called me within days of the first contract cancellation, his voice shaking with rage and panic. "You destroyed us, Gabriella. Daddy's going to lose everything he built because you're a vindictive little bitch who can't let go of grudges." "I didn't destroy anything, Diego," I replied with a calmness that surprised me. "You destroyed the business when you stole $800,000. I just made sure everyone knew about it before you could steal more or drag other people down with you." Roberto's phone call came the next day, and for the first time in my life, I heard my father sound genuinely desperate rather than angry or controlling. "Mija, you have to help us fix this," he pleaded. "Yes, Diego made mistakes, but we're family. We can work through this together if you come home and help us negotiate with the investigators." The irony was stunning. After months of attacks designed to force my return, they were finally asking for my help rather than demanding my submission. But it was too late for negotiation or compromise. They had taught me that family relationships were ultimately about power and control, and I had learned the lesson well. "Papa, you made it clear that I'm not family when I'm not useful," I told him. "You've spent months trying to destroy my career and my reputation to force me to come home. Now you want my help because your plan backfired and you need someone to clean up your mess. But I'm not coming home, and I'm not helping you avoid the consequences of your choices." While my family's business crumbled under the weight of their own corruption and my strategic disclosure of their crimes, I was simultaneously rebuilding my professional reputation in Seattle through aggressive networking and transparent communication about the attacks I had survived. The networking event Elena organized became a turning point in my career recovery. Instead of hiding from the controversy surrounding my family's attacks, I used my experience as a case study in professional resilience and ethical business practices. My presentation about rebuilding professional reputation after character assassination was standing room only, and the response from Seattle's business community was overwhelmingly positive. "Your story is exactly what our community needs to hear," said David Chun, the president of Seattle's Small Business Association. "You've shown that it's possible to maintain ethical standards and personal integrity even when faced with sophisticated attacks from people who should have supported you. That takes courage and character that most of us hope we never have to test." Within 2 months of going on the offensive, I had more potential clients than I could handle. Word spread quickly through Seattle's business networks about the financial consultant who had survived a systematic character assassination campaign and emerged stronger and more successful than before. Business owners who valued integrity and resilience specifically sought me out, wanting to work with someone who had proven she couldn't be intimidated or corrupted. The final stage of my counterattack was establishing Phoenix Financial Solutions as a formal consulting company rather than continuing to operate as a freelancer. With Amanda's help securing a small business loan and Jonathan's assistance with legal incorporation, I rented office space, hired 2 part-time employees, and began marketing my services to mid-sized businesses throughout the Pacific Northwest. The company name was deliberate and symbolic. Phoenix Financial Solutions represented my resurrection from the ashes of family destruction, but it also communicated to potential clients that I specialized in helping businesses and individuals recover from financial crisis and emerge stronger than before. My personal experience surviving systematic attacks gave me unique credibility with clients who needed both technical expertise and moral courage in their financial advisors. 18 months after launching Phoenix Financial Solutions, my company had grown beyond anything I had dared to imagine during those dark months of fighting off my family's attacks. We had 50 employees, offices in Seattle and Portland, and a client base that included several Fortune 500 companies seeking ethical financial consulting services. The business was generating revenue that exceeded what I had ever earned working for Martinez Construction, and more importantly, I was building something that reflected my own values and vision rather than adapting to someone else's expectations. The success felt surreal and deeply satisfying, but it was the vindication that came from my family's complete collapse that truly marked my victory over their attempts to control and destroy my independence. Martinez Construction filed for bankruptcy protection on a rainy Tuesday morning in November, exactly 2 years after I had left Texas. The company that Roberto had spent 30 years building was liquidated to pay creditors and settle the federal tax fraud charges that had resulted from my strategic disclosure of their financial crimes. Diego pled guilty to embezzlement and tax evasion charges, receiving a 3-year federal prison sentence and an order to pay restitution that would keep him financially devastated for the rest of his life. Roberto's punishment was arguably worse than prison. As the company's owner and primary signatory on the fraudulent tax filings, he faced massive financial penalties and the complete destruction of his professional reputation in the Texas construction industry. The man who had once commanded respect and wielded significant influence in our hometown was reduced to working as a project manager for a small home renovation company, making barely enough money to cover his legal fees and basic living expenses. Sophia's consequences were more indirect, but equally devastating to her carefully constructed image as the perfect daughter who could do no wrong. When the scandal broke, her marketing company lost several major clients who didn't want to be associated with the negative publicity. She was forced to relocate to Los Angeles and start her career over, a humbling experience for someone who had always relied on family connections and her father's reputation to advance professionally. The ultimate irony was that their campaign to destroy my career had actually accelerated my success while completely destroying their own family business. By forcing me to develop independence, resilience, and strategic thinking skills, they had created exactly the kind of formidable opponent they should have feared most. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of their downfall was how completely it vindicated my original concerns about Diego's financial management. Every prediction I had made about the consequences of his reckless behavior had come true, amplified by their decision to attack me rather than address the underlying problems I had identified. The first sign that my family was finally ready to face reality came through an unexpected phone call from my mother. Carmen had remained largely silent throughout the entire conflict, following Roberto's lead and supporting Diego's narrative about my betrayal and ingratitude. But as the legal and financial consequences mounted and the truth about Diego's crimes became undeniable, she finally found the courage to reach out directly. "Mija, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper when I answered the phone on a quiet Saturday afternoon. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you how sorry I am for everything that happened." The conversation that followed was one of the most painful and necessary of my life. Carmen finally acknowledged that I had been right about Diego's financial irresponsibility and that the family's response to my concerns had been unfair and destructive. She admitted that she had known Diego, was lying about some aspects of his business activities, but had been too afraid of Roberto's anger to speak up in my defense. "I was a coward, Gabriela," she said, crying openly on the phone. "I should have protected you from your father's temper and Diego's manipulation, but I was so used to keeping peace in the family that I forgot my responsibility to defend what was right. I lost my daughter because I was too weak to stand up to my husband and my son." Carmen's apology was genuine and heartfelt, but it came too late to repair the fundamental damage that had been done to our relationship. I could forgive her weakness and fear, but I couldn't forget that she had chosen family harmony over defending her daughter when it mattered most. Trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be rebuilt through apologies alone. The media attention surrounding Martinez Construction's collapse brought unexpected opportunities for Phoenix Financial Solutions. Seattle Business Journal featured my story in a cover article titled "From Family Betrayal to Financial Empire: How One Woman Built Success from Scandal." The article positioned me as an expert on business ethics and crisis management, leading to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities with companies seeking guidance on governance and risk management. The professional recognition was deeply gratifying, but it was the personal transformation that felt most significant. I was no longer the dutiful daughter who accepted disrespect and mistreatment in the name of family loyalty. I had become someone who could protect herself, fight back against injustice, and build something meaningful on her own terms. The scared young woman who had driven away from Texas with $15,000 and a broken heart had evolved into a confident CEO who commanded respect from clients, employees, and competitors. Roberto made one final attempt to contact me about 6 months after the bankruptcy proceedings concluded. He called late on a Sunday evening, clearly intoxicated and completely defeated by the consequences of his choices. "I know you'll never forgive me, Mija," he said, his voice slurred and heavy with regret. "But I need you to know that I was wrong about everything. You were trying to protect the business, and we destroyed you for it. I lost my company, I lost my respect in the community, and worst of all, I lost my daughter. You deserved better from me." Roberto's apology was the vindication I had never expected to receive, but had always secretly hoped for. Hearing him acknowledge that I had been right about Diego and that their treatment of me had been unjust provided closure to years of self-doubt and pain. But like Carmen's earlier apology, it came too late to restore what had been permanently damaged by years of betrayal and psychological warfare. "I appreciate you saying that, Papa," I told him. "But I can't go back to being the person who accepted mistreatment because it was easier for everyone else. You taught me that family love is conditional on compliance and submission, and I learned that lesson too well to forget it." By the end of my 3rd year in Seattle, Phoenix Financial Solutions was being courted by several larger firms interested in acquisition or merger opportunities. The company I had built from nothing while under attack from my own family was now valuable enough to attract offers in the 8-figure range from Fortune 500 companies seeking to expand their consulting capabilities. The success felt like the ultimate revenge against a family that had tried to convince me I was worthless without their support and approval. But more importantly, it represented something I had never experienced before: the complete freedom to make choices based on my own values and priorities rather than other people's expectations or demands. 5 years after that devastating Sunday dinner, when my father told me I took up too much space at his table, I'm sitting at my own table in my Seattle penthouse, preparing for another weekly dinner with the family I've chosen for myself. The dining room table seats 12 people comfortably, with warm lighting and space for everyone to be themselves without fear of judgment or manipulation. Tonight's guests include Elena Rodriguez, who has become the mother figure I always needed, supportive without being controlling, proud without being possessive. Dr. Amanda Foster brings updates about her thriving pediatric practice, which now serves 3 underserved communities and employs 15 people. Jonathan Hayes shares stories about his law firm's latest victories protecting workers' rights and small business owners. My Phoenix Financial Solutions team members bring their partners and children, creating the kind of inclusive, multi-generational gathering that feels authentically warm rather than performatively perfect. This chosen family doesn't share my DNA, but they share my values. They celebrate my successes without trying to take credit for them. They support me during challenging times without expecting me to sacrifice my well-being for their comfort. Most importantly, they love me for who I am rather than what I can do for them, which is a type of unconditional acceptance I never experienced growing up. Carmen calls me every few months now, usually on holidays or family birthdays. Our conversations are polite but distant. She updates me on her life in Portland, where she works as a part-time bookkeeper for a small nonprofit organization, and I share carefully edited highlights of my business success. We've achieved a kind of peaceful coexistence, but we'll never be close again. Trust that has been broken so fundamentally can't be rebuilt through good intentions alone. Roberto died of a heart attack last year, alone in his small apartment with unpaid legal bills stacked on his kitchen table. Sophia called to inform me about the funeral, which I didn't attend. I felt sadness for the waste of his life and the relationships he had destroyed through his need to control rather than love his family, but I didn't feel guilt about our estrangement. He had made choices that prioritized his ego and Diego's comfort over my well-being, and those choices had natural consequences that I wasn't responsible for ameliorating. Diego was released from federal prison 8 months ago and has been working at a chain restaurant in Houston while living in a halfway house. According to Carmen, he talks about wanting to apologize to me someday, but he hasn't made any direct contact. I think he understands that apologies are meaningless without genuine accountability, and he's not yet ready to face the full scope of how his choices affected not just me, but our entire family. Sophia has found success in Los Angeles working for a celebrity publicist, and her social media presence suggests she's built a new life that focuses on her own achievements rather than family dynamics. We've exchanged a few polite messages over the years, but neither of us has pursued a deeper reconnection. Some relationships are too damaged by betrayal and manipulation to be repaired, even when both parties have grown and changed. The most important lesson I've learned from this experience is that family love should feel like belonging rather than performing. Real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. It doesn't demand that you accept disrespect or mistreatment in the name of loyalty. It doesn't threaten to abandon you if you develop boundaries or independent opinions. Building Phoenix Financial Solutions taught me that I'm capable of creating something meaningful and valuable through my own efforts and vision. The company now employs over 100 people across 4 states, and we've helped thousands of small businesses and individuals achieve financial stability and independence. Every client we serve represents a choice to use my skills in service of people who value expertise and integrity rather than compliance and submission. But perhaps the most profound transformation has been learning to trust my own judgment and instincts rather than constantly second-guessing myself based on other people's opinions. For 31 years, I had been trained to doubt my perceptions whenever they conflicted with family narratives. If I thought Diego was being irresponsible, I must be jealous. If I felt disrespected by my father's treatment, I must be ungrateful. If I wanted independence and recognition, I must be selfish. Breaking free from that psychological conditioning required me to develop the courage to trust my own experiences and stand by my own values even when everyone around me insisted I was wrong. It meant learning to distinguish between legitimate self-reflection and destructive self-doubt. It meant accepting that some people will never approve of your choices, and their disapproval says more about their limitations than your worth. The financial success of Phoenix Financial Solutions has been deeply satisfying, but it's not the most important measure of my victory over my family's attempts to control and diminish me. The real victory is the peace I feel every morning when I wake up in my own space, surrounded by people who genuinely care about my well-being, working on projects that align with my values and contribute to causes I believe in. I've learned that some tables are designed to make certain people smaller, so others can feel bigger. The family table where I was told I took up too much space wasn't really about physical room. It was about emotional and psychological space for different perspectives, independent thinking, and personal growth. That table was constructed to maintain existing power dynamics rather than nurture individual potential. When you build your own table, you get to decide who deserves to sit there. You get to create space for honest conversation, mutual respect, and genuine support. You get to establish norms that prioritize truth over comfort and growth over stagnation. Most importantly, you get to design a gathering place where everyone belongs without having to earn their seat through submission or performance. Tonight, as I light the candles for another dinner with my chosen family, I think about that scared young woman who drove away from Texas 5 years ago with everything she owned packed into a Honda Civic. She had no idea she was capable of building an empire from betrayal, of turning family destruction into professional triumph, of creating authentic love from the ashes of conditional acceptance. The journey from that devastating Sunday dinner to this celebration of genuine belonging has taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love, for yourself and for others, is refusing to enable dysfunction in the name of family harmony. Sometimes protecting your own well-being requires you to walk away from people who insist that love requires self-sacrifice rather than mutual respect. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and personal integrity? How did you handle a situation where the people who were supposed to protect you became the ones you needed protection from? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to build a beautiful life even after family betrayal. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength you didn't know you had. Remember, some people spend their whole lives trying to earn a seat at the wrong table, but when you build your own table, you get to decide who deserves to sit there. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you deserve relationships that celebrate your growth rather than fear your independence. Here's to building tables that have room for everyone to be their authentic selves, and to finding the courage to leave tables where you're asked to be smaller than you really are.